by the Teatro Nacional Dona Maria II, the National Theatre, where Garizo do Carmo was director of the creative office. She was a collaborator in the photography laboratory of the EPT, where she helped the laboratories of the conservation and restoration course, making records of photographic analysis of art objects. She worked at LUPA in the area of documentation, conservation, restoration, and photographic digitation and quality control, dealing with collections from institutions such as the Carlos Gulbenkian Foundation, Casa Fernando Pessoa, Museu de Marinha, Banco de Portugal, Fundação EDP, National Museum of Ancient Arts, and Teatro Nacional Dona Maria II. She is currently involved in the treatment of the photographic collection of José Marques, a photographer of the 20th century Portuguese theatre scene, at the Teatro Nacional Dona Maria II, dealing mainly with the physical organization of more than 600,000 photographic negatives. Beatriz will make her presentation in Portuguese, but the PowerPoint is in English, so you can try to follow it. And if you have any questions, you might ask in the end.
Obrigada. Boa tarde a todos. Bom dia, aliás. Então, a minha apresentação é sobre... Ok, estão a ouvir bem? É sobre o espólio fotográfico de Jorge Afonso Garizo do Carmo, que encontra-se arquivado no Teatro Nacional Dona Maria II. Esta comunicação pretende então contextualizar e apresentar esta produção fotográfica de Garizo do Carmo, que foi designer no Teatro Nacional Dona Maria II entre 1978 e 1996. Foi neste período em que esteve envolvido no teatro que iniciou esta produção fotográfica. Também enquanto diretor do Gabinete Criativo, que foi fundado em 1978, quando Garizo do Carmo integra contratualmente o teatro, porque antes disso já tinha colaborado como freelancer. E esta é uma das coleções fotográficas importantes no teatro, porque serve, mas que explicarei mais à frente, do teatro, que se encontra então na Biblioteca Arquivo. Jorge Afonso Garizo do Carmo nasceu em 1997, viajou por vários locais, ingressou em 44 em Arquitetura na Escola de Belas Artes do Porto, curso este que abandona em 48, no entanto, sem concluir. No entanto, este foi um período muito importante para ele, não só a nível de estabelecer grandes contactos, mas também porque integrou o grupo dos Independentes do Porto, que lhe deu ali o início nesta área artística. Em 48 muda-se para Paris, não só dá continuidade à arquitetura, mas ingressa também noutras áreas artísticas, nomeadamente a pintura, a gravura e as artes gráficas. Tem inclusive uma oficina própria de gravura e trabalha como freelancer na área das artes gráficas. E aqui inicia também um percurso a nível de exposições individuais e chega a ser decorador da Casa de Portugal em Paris. Em 1954 regressa a Portugal, onde não só expõe individualmente, mas também coletivamente, e é convidado a expor na Sociedade Nacional de Belas Artes, o que acaba por não acontecer por estar novamente ausente em Moçambique. Em 56 muda-se definitivamente mais um período para Moçambique, onde não só continua a fazer exposições, como assume também algumas funções de liderança, nomeadamente no Centro de Cultura e Arte e no Cineclube da Beira, e onde é também jornalista, redator, paginador. Durante a sua carreira é bolseiro de algumas instituições, nomeadamente do governo francês, do governo polaco e da Fundação Carlos Gulbenkian. Participei em várias bienais, como São Paulo, Japão, Estados Unidos, Sérvia, Canadá e Finlândia, e, além das áreas que eu já mencionei, aborda também a escultura, o cinema, a fotografia e a cerâmica. Estas são algumas das obras que podemos ainda visitar em alguns edifícios, nomeadamente em Moçambique. São alguns painéis cerâmicos. E, aqui deixo destacado, algumas das coleções onde o trabalho de Garizo do Carmo se encontra presente, não só a nível fotográfico, mas também a nível, de artes gráficas, nomeadamente na Fundação Carlos Gulbenkian, no Museu da Universidade de Aveiro, na Caixa Geral de Depósitos, no Museu Nacional de Arte e Dança, no Teatro Nacional Dona Maria II e em Moçambique, na Fundação José Craveirinha e no Museu Nacional de Arte. No Teatro Nacional Dona Maria II, Garizo do Carmo ingressa então em 1978, como eu disse, antes desta data já tinha colaborado com o teatro como freelancer, também a realizar cartazes para o teatro, mas é então em 78 que é convidado a ser diretor deste gabinete criativo que inicia também nesta data, onde é diretor durante cerca de 10 anos. No teatro foi também responsável, por organizar algumas, exposições, onde pôde também, não é, expor alguma da sua obra, da sua autoria, nomeadamente cartazes, hã, folhetos, enfim, artes gráficas, e produtos de comunicação do teatro, mas também, parte da sua coleção fotográfica que, a qual fundou e iniciou enquanto diretor. No teatro é também autor noutras coleções, destaco aqui a coleção do álbum teatral, que é uma coleção que, ou seja, reúne as peças que inicia também em 78 e que vem dar continuidade a uma coleção anterior, a uns livros de registro que a uns livros de registro de repertório que incluíram a fotografia e que pretendiam, registar toda a atividade do teatro, não é, nomeadamente espetáculos, e, esta coleção do álbum teatral vem dar continuidade a isso, mais focada na fotografia, ou seja, faz compila aqui os registros fotográficos das peças apresentadas no teatro e, da qual, fazem parte maioritariamente impressões fotográficas da coleção original de negativos da qual eu falo mais à frente. A sua autoria está também patente na coleção de cartazes, onde se contabilizam cerca de 70 cartazes com uma estética, muito impressionante avaliada por todos de uma boa forma, não é? E, é ainda possível hoje adquirir esta coleção de 16 postais no merchandising do teatro, que, na altura foi financiada pela empresa tabaqueira e que pretendia, dar visibilidade aos diferentes momentos da história do edifício do Teatro Nacional da Ana Maria II. A coleção fotográfica, então, que eu destaco nesta apresentação é a que vemos aqui na imagem à direita. Aqui encontra-se toda a coleção, e que se iniciou por Garizo, com o objetivo de lhe servir de base para a realização de cartazes e outros materiais gráficos promocionais do teatro e constituem, um importante registro das cenas de ensaios e de algumas das peças mais importantes ao longo deste período no teatro. Esta importância foi desde cedo notada por Garizo do Carmo e que demonstra, não é, uma grande preocupação com a organização e preservação dessas imagens, já como uma memória coletiva a preservar para um futuro. Deixo aqui 2 certos de cartas e de comunicações feitas a superiores de Garizo na altura, em que ele demonstra já o cuidado e a importância de ter esta coleção organizada e bem arquivada, não é? E tive ainda, durante a minha investigação, a oportunidade de realizar um pré-inventário, em que eu divido em duas secções, a secção dos 22 dossiês que têm uma organização minimamente definida, deixada pelo autor, que inclusive a partir da lombada conseguimos perceber a datação, o tema e a autoria, que vai desde 78 então a 96, o período em que Garice esteve no teatro, que é composta por negativos, diapositivos e provas de contacto, e aborda as temáticas de elenco de atores, exposições documentais, estreias e peças de teatro. O segundo conjunto é um conjunto que víamos atrás na terceira prateleira e é um conjunto ainda sem grande organização e que, além das espécies que eu mencionei anteriormente, engloba também algumas provas instantâneas, bilhetes, convites, postais e maquetes, que não fazem propriamente parte de um espólio fotográfico, mas que se entende que Garizo arquivava aqui de um modo a preservar também aquilo, porque também este era um arquivo pessoal ao mesmo tempo que profissional, não é? E aqui são abordadas também outras temáticas além das temáticas teatrais. Pude ainda apurar as quantidades deste espólio, na totalidade das duas secções, em que se avaliaram 24.427 espécies, das quais 973 são provas de contacto e provas fotográficas, e 23.454 são negativos, diapositivos ou internegativos. De todo este espólio foi possível identificar a autoria de Garizo do Carmo de diferentes formas. Trago aqui alguns exemplos de carimbos que foram alterando ao longo do tempo, não é? E ele foi alterando consoante o tempo evoluiu. E deixo aqui também algumas identificações comuns, nomeadamente no verso das provas, em que ele identifica os materiais utilizados, a câmara, a data da sessão, e a peça. É possível ainda de verificar alguma da sua seleção fotográfica que viria a ser ampliada, não é? E alguns exemplos de possíveis crops a fazer nessas ampliações. Deixo aqui também um exemplo de uma etiqueta que é muito comum, que aliás está presente em praticamente todas as folhas de arquivo do espólio, dos 22 dossiês com organização, e que nos menciona a peça, que neste caso o AFM é o Anúncio Feito a Maria, e informa-nos o número do rolo. Este seria o segundo rolo desta peça, o preto e branco, de ser um rolo a preto e branco, e o ensaios, o momento da captura do fotógrafo. Deixo aqui ainda na imagem do canto inferior direito, aquele que foi o seu primeiro gabinete do teatro, mais tarde ele mudou de sala e este é atualmente o gabinete do diretor artístico por cima do Salão Nobre. Na segunda secção, sem organização, sobretudo, mas também na primeira dos dossiês, foram possíveis identificar diversas outras autorias, que eu trago aqui alguns exemplos, como o Luís Carlos, que acabou por ser parceiro de Garizo do Carmo durante um grande período no teatro, mas também outras pessoas que colaboravam esporadicamente no teatro ou que facultavam as suas fotografias para que fossem usadas mais uma vez nos materiais gráficos desta instituição. E deixo aqui Ricardo Martins, Pedro Pinho, Luís Constantino. E posto isto, verifiquei que apenas 13.188 espécies são confirmadamente da autoria de Garizo. O resto, grande maioria, será também da sua autoria, mas como não existe um carimbo ou uma assinatura, não foi possível ainda fazer essa confirmação. Sobre o estado de conservação deste espólio, deixo aqui algumas patologias, nomeadamente, enunciei algumas, a utilização de carimbos, como vimos, que está patente em todas as espécies, inclusive nas folhas de arquivo, a deterioração biológica que vemos aqui na segunda imagem, a ondulação, que vemos na primeira imagem, negativos coloridos e provas identificadas com marcador, e negativos intervencionados, que vemos aqui na segunda imagem, que o próprio autor fazia para que a ampliação viesse já com este resultado estético. Para considerações finais, deixo então que esta investigação serviu para tem uma grande importância, que será muito importante fazer o tratamento completo deste espólio, porque é frequentemente, ou seja, usado até no dia a dia, não os negativos originais, porque ainda não se encontra o espólio digitalizado, mas a partir do álbum teatral, onde maioritariamente se encontram provas de Garizo do Carmo, e é usado no serviço de investigação da Biblioteca Arquivo, solicitado por investigadores e por curadores que pretendem expor temáticas teatrais. Que esta investigação serviu então para a geração de um maior conhecimento disponível e entendimento sobre este autor e designer, e que revelou esta faceta pouco conhecida de Garizo do Carmo como fotógrafo de cena, que serve para despoltar novos e renovados interesses públicos e académicos em torno deste espólio fotográfico e deste autor, e que e é isso. Deixo aqui o título da minha dissertação de mestrado, onde abordo esta investigação e de uma forma mais extensa, não é? Se tiverem interesse em consultar. E onde também está toda a bibliografia utilizada para produzir esta apresentação. E agradeço então pela vossa atenção.
Obrigada, Beatriz. Now we'll move on to Carolina Ventura. Consegues pôr o PowerPoint? Yeah, this is the bio. Although she works as a graphic she works as a graphic documents conservator at the present, but she can say that she's been wandering through different fields of knowledge, and all of them are somehow still present in her life. She firstly studied in Coimbra University, where she got her master's degree in psychology. After that, she got a bachelor degree in conservation and restoration with specialization in graphic documents. Recently, she's had the opportunity to start collaborating with the Teatro Experimental do Porto, where she's responsible for the conservation and rehousing of the artistic and the archival collection, and for helping with other conservation-related tasks, such as exhibition planning and digitization of documents. Besides that, she's been trying to deepen and broaden her knowledge in art history and in conservation, as well as in the new challenges that are currently emerging in these fields. Carolina Ventura's talk is titled Preserving Theater. This is a bit redundant. Yeah, go ahead.
Of a theater company. I must say that this is my first time dealing with this kind of collections and the problematics they invoke. So you can imagine that while I was working, many questions emerged. A part of this presentation will talk a little bit about those questions and what I could or couldn't find in literature regarding them, and how an art conservator would try to approach it. I would also like to say that this is still a work in progress and that I am constantly finding new information about this topic. Besides that, this was one of those works that kept raising questions instead of answering them. So this is the structure of the presentation. I will firstly introduce TEP, Teatro Experimental do Porto. I will start talking a little bit about Teatro Experimental do Porto, the company where this work is taking place. I will call it just TEP. TEP is the oldest professional theater company in Porto, in Portugal, and they have been active since the 50s. We could say that their story is inevitably intertwined with the story of the city and even of our country, either politically, socially, and artistically. As you can imagine, this company was built by many people and went through many different moments and places. Nonetheless, regardless the changes and challenges that occurred along the years, the company still prevails and is proudly active. Their activities go beyond staging and include things like exhibition, public talks, and cultural dissemination, as you can see by those pictures. And TEP is a company that also spreads beyond geographical borders, taking part into activities and plays in other countries with foreigner companies. So, considering its long and rich history, they decided that it would be important to preserve and catalog their artistic and archival collection, and gladly they won the funds for that. The collections I'm talking about are really broad and diverse, and we have photographs, flyers, drawings and paintings, letters, scripts, notebooks, and so on. Most of them were produced and created by the company and its artists or designers, but some were also donated, either by actors or associates and people connected with the company. We also have clothes, mock-ups, and objects related with the plays, but I will only be focusing on the archival and artistic collections. So in these photos, you can see our archive and a storage room where we will keep the posters and the collection once they're treated. And although there is so much variety, the photographic collection is definitely the one that catches our attention, not only because of its dimension and variety, but also because of what it makes us feel. Even if someone wasn't even born when most of those moments were captured, it's easy to find yourself reliving and getting lost in them just by looking at those pictures. Dealing with this collection has been an interesting experience because as a conservator, one of the most important issues in the preservation of an artwork, either tangible or intangible, is its authenticity. Nonetheless, in contrast, I figured that my first and major reaction to these photographs as a person was mostly emotional. As you can imagine, this raises many questions for a conservator. At this point, I started to wonder what role photography played in the preservation of theater, and that led to the following questions. What is the impact of each document or photograph in the perception of the company? What is the impact of each document or photograph in the perception of the place it depicts? To what extent did personal emotions affect the caption of a photograph of a play and eventually the perception of the play? And would it be possible to use photos to reenact the play? And how could the photos help us do that? So considering those questions, I decided to dive into literature to find out some answers. And the first thing I felt that we have to deal with is the controversy and subjectivity around saving and perpetuating the ephemeral, either because of the impossibility of turning something intangible into a palpable document or information, or because some authors feel that the disappearance is the fundamental nature of performance. This is evident either in theater or in performative arts in general. Photography also seems to be a very diversified and highly conceptual and artistic topic in theater. Either in theater and the performative arts, photography goes beyond being just a way of documenting a play or performance. Photography seems to be an entity by itself, and in many moments has its own artistic and even performative intent, which also transforms it into something subjective. Although it's impossible to deny that photography has been playing a major role in the documentation of theater, It's also important to recognize that by itself, it doesn't allow to reenact a play or performance. It needs to be allied with other resources. So after processing this information, I decided to explore the panorama of theater preservation and archives initiatives in general. In this section, I will just mention some examples that we have in Portugal. I will not make a full coverage. In Portugal, there are some institutions like universities and theater houses or museums like the National Museum of Theater and Dance with archives and activities dedicated to study theater and performative arts. There are also research groups that actively study and promote theater and performative arts like SET and LIPA. SET seems to be the most active research center, having worked to create protocols with many institutions and partners like museums, libraries, theater companies, and theater houses. And they also make visible efforts to collect, organize, and provide information and documents related to theater. An example of that are the projects they brought to life. Although there are many more, I would like to make a brief mention to SETVAS, a database where you can find details about theater plays, like their authors, the dates and companies that produce them, among others. OPSIS, a theater iconography database. And there's also the newborn project Art, Arquivar Teatro, or Archiving Theater, a pioneer project that aims to identify and study the state of theater archives in Portugal in order to define a plan of procedures and establish a network between institutions. Although there are so many efforts, it was not really clear for me if there were being made active efforts to systematically document and preserve the reenactment of a play in the moment of the staging, either on the moment of the staging, and during its preparation. So one of the first impressions one gets after this research is the lack of systematization in documenting theater. Besides that, although I was surprised with the variety of information and works focusing on this topic, I couldn't really find any under the point of view of a conservator restorer. I found many historians, artists, philosophers, art historians, and so on. But as for art conservators, although works regarding non-traditional forms of art in museological context seem to be sprouting, I was unable to find any in theater. Somehow it's not really surprising because maybe our work is still very connected with materiality. Indeed, only recently conservators have been focusing on the conceptual and intangible, mostly due to the new technologies and mediums the artists use to create their works. At the present, we have a crescent group of conservators, museums, and other institutions working to develop models and methodologies to systematize the preservation of performance-based or immaterial works of art. These methodologies may go from documentation of technicalities to artist interviews. Approaches to the conservation of non-traditional media, such as performance, installations, time-based media, among others, began prioritizing the conceptuality, functionality, and presentation of these artworks rather than the material. Considering this, it seemed that there's a great deal of information and procedures that could easily be adjusted to theater documentation and minimize some of its issues. As example, I would like to make a brief mention to the live list by Tate and the decision-making model for contemporary art conservation and presentation developed by Cologne Institute of Conservation Sciences. So, the Live List is a project that aims to provide a greater insight into the conceptual and practical challenges related to collecting and conserving artists' performance. In order to do that, they focus on collecting systematized information according to the next steps. Agree and understand the basic parameters of the work, relationship with the museum and collection, the production of the performance, and documentation. And in each of these steps, they ask some questions, and I selected just a few that could be adjusted to theater. And those are, what are the basic parameters of the work, like duration, space? Is it dependent on a moment in time, political, cultural, or social? And if so, what will be managed in the future from of the work? What are the conditions of the space? Does the space where the work is performed need to be modified in any way? Do they use objects form part of an archive? What forms of documentation are available? Some more. Who is responsible for the different aspects of the work, like its production, display, documentation, and conservation? What needs to be documented and for what purpose? What types of agreement need to be documented, like license agreements, acquisition agreements, among others? How should the performance itself be documented? There's also the decision-making model for contemporary art conservation and presentation. It's not my intention to go through and explain each step. What I really want is to share what kind of efforts are being made by art conservators, and that these models might cover similar questions to those that pop up when one thinks about preserving and documenting theater. As you can see by the name of each step, it focuses mainly on trying to understand and collecting information about the study subject, and you can go back and forth according to the needs of the object you are studying. And the authors of the model are very thorough explaining it and also suggest a few questions that we can use. Just like before, I selected some that seem to be useful to theater documentation. Who are the decision makers and how the decision is going to be made? Are potential future changes anticipated in the materials and technology used for any performance? It's okay, but when we get the idea, I think. Sorry. Okay, and for any presentation. Oops. Okay. Is there a relevant discrepancy between the artwork's current state and the desired state under consideration of its authenticity, historicity, aesthetic, and artistic factors? What relation does the use, aging, damage, or decay have to the initial materialization meaning of the artwork? Does the work have parts that can be regularly replaced without affecting the identity or meaning of the artwork? So, considering all of this information, either on the state of art, of theater documentation, and about developments in art conservation, at the present moment, what I really want is to ask, should there be a model or methodology to preserve intentionally a play? Should there be systematization of this kind of procedures? How can we achieve that? Who should be a part of this initiative and process? How to identify those intervenients, and what should be the role of a conservatory restorer in this context? How should we elaborate those models and procedures so they are flexible enough and able to assimilate all of the necessary components, even if some were not predicted? And how can we decide what should or should not play? How should we deal with the objects and equipments used? How can we turn theater documentation into a sustainable practice? And this is all. Thank you.
Não fica, agora só vem as três. Now we have not a lot, but some time for questions, comments. So if you want to ask.
Thank you. Well, thank you all. Lisa, I was particularly interested in the example you're working to. I'm wondering whether it pointed to the period of transition from performance to a performative practice that engaged with the commercial market rather than performance itself.
I understood that you were talking about this point of transition. You said from.
Yeah, I'm just suggesting.
I didn't acoustically understand the question.
Sorry, I'll try. I'm just wondering if the example you gave points to a period in the transition from performance art to a practice that actually engaged with the market rather than rejected it, and had a performative element in its approach, but later became the dominant form of performance practice. So it's what rewrote the canon rather than a performance practice that had been this rejection of the market, but still continues in an alternative history.
Well, I think no matter the historical time frame, this rejection and the submission to the market always existed in parallel. So I don't think that there's a transition from like first rejection and later subjection. Well, I would say that this period I was focusing on was the time when performance in the art world, like the visual art world and the museum world, started to become a medium in and of itself. And so I see a transition there, but
So, no, I just think it points to an interesting moment in the divergence of practice, where artists could use performative within the commercial marketplace because photography was becoming an acceptable medium in itself. Whereas very many performance artists who still continue created images of their work for its archival purpose alone and didn't enter into that marketplace,
okay. Yeah.
and that the marketplace has dictated the history that we now come to know.
So I wouldn't really make different. I wouldn't make that differentiation. I think because I think producing work only for your personal archive, like in some way, also prefigures or expects that someone will come later and look at the work. Not maybe as like like photography as a piece of art to be put in a museum. Maybe that was not the intention, but I think the potential of these images becoming artworks and entering the art discourse, I think that was always at the back of the mind of these artists. But I mean, I guess there's many. I mean, the artists who did not show in museums kind of fall through the cracks of my research. So I guess there have been artists who didn't document their work at all, whom we don't know about today, of course. And then maybe there's some who just documented their work and the photographs got buried in the archives and we don't know about them today. But well, yeah, we can have a we can have like a conversation about this later, maybe.
Thank you so much for all the presentation. I have a question for Lisa too. My question concerns the display of photography inside the museum. Your research intersects some of mine, so I have a question for you. The decision to leave the work unframed, it was a museum's decision, or because, for example, in the case of Oppenheim, who was very critical and skeptical toward an artisticization of the documentation, the decision to leave the work on frames qualifies the documentation as secondary, or rather the primary work, which is the performance, that it's not more accessible. So I just wonder if there was museum's choice or an artist's choice. Thank you.
To be clear, the photographs were not unframed. They were framed, but kind of not visible. Like they had a glass, and there were like these metal hooks who hold the thing together. So there was a frame, but it must have been a museum decision because all the photographs were in identical frames. And as to Oppenheim, he's an interesting figure in this sense, because I don't know if he really opposed documentation of his work, because many of his early performances are the ones that were also present in the exhibition were actually only staged for the camera. And interestingly, I didn't go into this because it would have gone too far, but the Ira Lick, the curator, chose work by Dennis Oppenheim because he thought he should be represented in the work, even though Dennis Oppenheim did not perform anymore really like live or with his own body, but he used stand-ins for his body in his performances. Also, one in the program of this exhibition, or in the live program. But the images that were in the exhibition were actually video stills or film stills. So Ira Licht chose to make film stills out of these moving images. And to be able to put them along with like all the other work. So,
any other question, preferably for Carolina or?
Yes, yes.
or
Thank you
Beatriz?
all of you for your presentations. Yeah, precisely, I'm going to not make a question, but a comment on presentations by Carolina and Beatriz, because I really would like to say that I feel particularly happy that they brought this subject to the conference. It might seem not to be the most trendy approach that we could expect in this kind of reflections today, but it is actually something that we have to look at very carefully. All this job that, particularly in Portugal, it's not done yet at all. So we have to done this kind of job. We have to dig. We have to do this kind of excavation of the archive. So only after that we can reflect and we can make interactions and all all the theories, all the theoretical reflection on that. So I would like to compliment for their presentations on that, and I hope that much more researchers keep going with that in that path. Thank you.
I'm afraid our time is okay. One last question. Yeah. Yeah. If you have any more questions, we can continue the conversation outside.
Okay, I'll try to be brief. I just wanted to, I was very interested in the question, should we take pictures of the public? And I think that's amazing that you brought that question, because many times I thought about it and I don't have the answer. So, but I was thinking about the purpose itself. So it could serve the theater director, it could serve the art critic, it could serve only like a promotional purpose, even, like communication in the institution.
Well, I think that it will serve all of those agents, because some plays and even some performances are thought to have a certain impact in the public, and registering the reaction of the public is kind of the way to document if the play or if the act had the intended intended effect on the public. So it could serve all of those agents, yes. Besides that, in the future, if someone wants to make the same impression on the public, for example, they can analyze and observe and read the documents or see the photographs taken at that play and try to remake it, try to do it again. And I think that that's particularly interesting if we are living things like political turmoils or social turmoil. Right now, for example, we have many activistic movements, and I felt that we have some plays that are trying to translate it and to recreate in the theater rooms, the reactions that public should have outside to what is happening. I don't know if I'm making myself clear. I'm sorry. So thank you.
Thank you.
So now our time is up. Let us thank our speakers. Thank you. To recover some of the time we wasted, we'll go to lunch, and we come back at 2 p.m. It's a shorter lunch, but yeah, 2. Yeah. 2:20. Never mind. 2:20. Yeah. Yeah. Meet you downstairs.